Hey guys, tonight we're traveling back, way back, to a time when summer wasn't just an inconvenience. It was a force of nature you had to simply endure. Forget about the gentle hum of your modern AC unit. Imagine, instead, the heavy, still air of a late afternoon in the ancient world. Picture yourself there. You're in a stone courtyard, maybe in Rome, maybe in Mesopotamia. The sun isn't just bright. It's a physical weight pressing down on the white plaster walls, making the distant hills shimmer like a mirage. The air is thick enough to drink, buzzing with lazy flies. You can feel the grit of dust on your skin, a gritty paste mixing with sweat that doesn't evaporate, just sits there. You're wearing linen, probably, but it's glued to your back. There's no ice for your drink, no shade that feels truly cool. Just the relentless, oven-like heat radiating from every surface. Frankly, you wouldn't last a day. You're already mentally composing angry Yelp reviews for the Bronze Age. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And let me know in the comments where in the world you're listening from and what time it is for you. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum. And let's ease into tonight's journey together. For millennia, this was the universal human condition. Summer was a siege to be weathered. The rich might flee to hill estates. The poor simply suffered. The quest for coolness was as fundamental as the quest for food or shelter. And in this endless struggle, our ancestors got creative. Before we get to the world's first mechanical air cooling device, we have to wade through centuries of human ingenuity, desperation, and some ideas that were just plain bizarre. Early solutions were about working with the environment, not conquering it. Architecture was the first line of defense. You see thick-walled houses in the Middle East with wind catchers, ingenious towers that funneled any stray breeze down into the living quarters. The Romans mastered the art of the aqueduct, and they'd often run channels of cool water through the walls of wealthy villas, a primitive form of conductive cooling. They understood airflow, designing homes around central courtyards for ventilation. But these were passive systems. They relied on the whims of nature, a breeze deciding to show up, water from the mountains being available. Then there were the personal solutions. The handheld fan is one of humanity's oldest tools. From simple palm fronds in Egypt to elaborate, jeweled Uchiwa fans in Japan's Heian period, it was a direct, physical translation of effort into a tiny pocket of relief. Servants would be employed for the sole purpose of fanning their masters. But you know how it is, your arm gets tired after 5 minutes. It's not a scalable solution. And then we have let's call them conceptual approaches. Ancient Egyptians would hang wet reeds in their windows, hoping the evaporating water would cool the incoming air. It was a good instinct, touching on a correct scientific principle, but about as effective as trying to air condition a stadium with a damp washcloth. The wealthy and powerful always had access to the most extreme measures. The Roman Emperor Elagabalus, a man not known for his subtlety, is said to have had mountains of snow transported from the Apennines and stored in pits insulated with straw, just to pile it in his gardens during summer parties. It was a staggering display of power and logistics, the ancient equivalent of shipping icebergs from Antarctica. But it was also fleeting, insanely expensive, and utterly impractical for anyone else. For most people, the primary cooling strategy was behavioral, the siesta. The sensible practice of shutting down during the hottest part of the day. Life slowed to a crawl. The world napped. And in that torpor, the dream of beating the heat persisted. But turning that dream into a consistent, mechanical reality required more than just clever architecture or slave labor. It required a specific kind of civilization, one obsessed with order, administration, and large-scale engineering. It required a culture that saw a problem not just as something to be endured, but as a system to be solved. It required bureaucratic minds that loved gears, hydraulics, and standardized processes. And as we drift back through those shimmering heat waves of history, Our path leads us inexorably east, to the river valleys of a land that turned imperial administration into an art form, and engineering into a philosophy. To the place where the first true air conditioner, however primitive, would begin to whir and click, ancient China. So we've established the baseline, a hot, sticky, fly-buzzing, universally sweaty past. The story of cooling up to a point is a story of clever adaptations and lavish excesses for the elite. But adaptation has its limits. You can only design your house so well, only have so many slaves fanning you before it feels logistically ridiculous, and only import so much snow before your treasury complains. What was missing was a machine. A device that didn't just redirect nature's gifts or expend human effort one-to-one, but one that multiplied that effort. Something that uses small, manageable input of energy to create a disproportionate output of cool, comfortable air. That leap from passive to active, from adaptation to invention, needed a specific spark. Our journey takes a turn from the Mediterranean sun into a different kind of intellectual climate. Imagine the mindset. While some empires were focused on conquest and monuments, the Chinese bureaucratic state, particularly from the Han Dynasty onward, was a marvel of systematic thinking. They standardized everything: weights, measures, the width of cart axles, so their ruts would match roads across the empire. They had a civil service exam based on classical texts. They maintained massive grain stores to stabilize prices. This was a civilization that loved a good, sensible system. And when you apply the kind of methodical, engineering-minded brain to a problem like it's unbearably hot in the royal palace in the summer, you don't just order more fans. You start a diagram. You think about levers, about water power, about rotational force. But before the Han engineers got to work, people still had to cope. And in the quest for cool, things got wonderfully strange. There's a reason we call some ideas half-baked. In the heat, people were willing to try the other half. Take sun protection. In some parts of the ancient world, the quest for the perfect sunblock led to some unique formulations. Forget zinc oxide. There are records, tucked away in lesser-known medical texts, of recipes involving crocodile dung, mixed with oils and clays, believed to protect the skin from the sun's harshness. Let that image sit for a moment. The smell alone would probably keep everyone at a distance, creating a personal space cooler, I suppose. You definitely wouldn't last a day with that on your face. Other cultures swore by pastes of mud and rice bran, which at least sounds more pleasant. The line between cosmetics, medicine, and desperate heat mitigation was wonderfully blurry. Then there were the philosophical and almost magical approaches. In India, yogic texts spoke of pranayama, breath control techniques like shitali, where you curl your tongue and inhale slowly, supposedly cooling the body from the inside out. It's a brilliant internalization of the problem. If you can't cool the world, cool your own physiology. In Persia, architects didn't just build wind catchers. They often built them over underground water channels or qanats, so the captured breeze was cooled and humidified as it descended, a beautifully passive form of evaporative cooling built right into the city's bones. These were brilliant context-specific solutions, but they weren't a machine you could point to and say, there, that's the ancestor of the AC. Back in China, the wealthy of the Han period had their own versions of Roman excess, but with a distinctive flair. They used massive, manually operated fans. Not handheld, but room-sized. Imagine a huge panel of fabric or woven reed, mounted on a frame, operated by a servant pulling a cord in a rhythmic motion, a giant, human-powered, oscillating fan. It was a step up in scale, but still just a multiplication of muscle power. They also used water features extensively in their courtyards and gardens, understanding intuitively that evaporating water cooled the air around it. They'd hang wet mats in doorways. But these were still fragments of an idea. The key was to connect these fragments, the systematic engineering mindset, the understanding of evaporation, and the available mechanical energy sources. They needed to replace the servant pulling the cord with something more powerful, more consistent, and less likely to ask for a break. They needed a water wheel. And it's at this junction of need, knowledge, and technology that our story finds its inventor, or at least the first one to get a clear, historical footnote for putting it all together. To understand the birthplace of the first air conditioning machine, you have to picture the Han Dynasty at its zenith. Think of it not as a time of chaotic invention, but of ordered, state-sponsored innovation. This is 200 BCE to 200 CE, a period of staggering consolidation. The first emperor, Qin Shi Huang, had unified China with fire and sword, but the Han Dynasty that followed built the systems to hold it together. A vast network of roads and canals, standardized written script that bound a diverse empire, and a bureaucracy that could manage millions. This is the crucial backdrop. In a civilization this organized, technology often serves the state and its luxury. The imperial court in Chang'an or Luoyang wasn't just a place of politics. It was the apex of consumption, a showcase for what the empire's finest minds could devise to ease and glorify the lives of the elite. Discomfort, especially for the Son of Heaven, was not just a personal nuisance. It was a cosmological imbalance. A hot emperor was an unhappy emperor, and an unhappy emperor was bad for the entire celestial mandate. So, the imperial workshops hummed. Artisans and engineers weren't just craftsmen. They were minor civil servants, part of a system that recorded, refined, and occasionally patented new devices. They worked on everything from improved looms and agricultural tools to complex astronomical instruments and ornate mechanical toys for the emperor's amusement. This culture of mechanical curiosity is vital. They had water clocks that told time with dazzling accuracy using a cascade of overflow tanks and indicator rods. They had complex gear systems. They understood rotary motion, linking it from water wheels to trip hammers for pounding grain or forging metal. The mechanical principles for a cooling machine existed in the ecosystem. They just hadn't been pointed at the problem of heat in the right combination yet. Now, let's talk about the lesser-known fact, the kind of detail that makes history feel real and slightly absurd. While the grand engineers were sketching water wheel designs, the daily battle against heat involved some truly peculiar fashion choices. Among the upper-class women and scholars of the Han, a popular summer accessory was a jade pillow. These weren't soft cushions. They were often carved from a single, smooth block of nephrite jade, sometimes hollowed out and filled with cool water, or just used as is. The idea was that jade stayed cool to the touch far longer than fabric or wood. Imagine trying to get a good night's sleep with your head on a literal rock, all for the sake of a faint, dissipating coolness. It's the perfect symbol of the pre-mechanical age, immense luxury and effort for a tiny, passive payoff. Historians debate whether these were actually comfortable or just potent status symbols, a display of both wealth and a supposed refinement that could appreciate the cool virtue of jade. Either way, you wouldn't last a night on one. But the imperial engineers were after something more active, more systemic. They looked at the palace's pain points. The grand audience halls, with their high ceilings, could be drafty in winter and stagnant ovens in summer. The living quarters were enclosed for privacy and security, which also trapped heat. They already used water. Canals and pools were integral to palace garden design, following the principles of feng shui to channel positive energy, or qi. It was a short, brilliant leap of logic. Could they channel that water, not just for beauty or qi, but to move air? Could they use the mechanical energy of flowing water, which they harnessed for so many other tasks, to drive a fan? Not a fan waved by a person, but a fan turned by a machine, placed where it could pull air over a water source? The concept is so elegantly simple it feels inevitable. A water-powered fan. The birth of mechanical air conditioning wasn't a sudden eureka moment with a light bulb. It was the slow, deliberate assembly of existing puzzle pieces, water power, rotary fans, and evaporative cooling, into a new picture. And the man often credited with putting that picture together, according to sparse but tantalizing records, was a Tang Dynasty engineer named Ding Huan. The Han had the system and the need. Ding Huan, centuries later, would provide one of the first clear mechanical blueprints. Let's slip now into the heart of the Han Imperial Palace. It's not just one building, but a small city of rammed earth and timber structures, painted in vermilion and adorned with ceramic roof tiles. The air in the private chambers is still, thick with the scent of sandalwood incense and lacquer. You can hear the distant, rhythmic clack of a loom and the faint murmur of court officials, but no breeze stirs the silk hangings. It's here, away from the ceremonial courtyards, that the need for coolness was most acute. And it's here that the earliest inklings of a systematic solution took shape, not as a single machine, but as an integrated architectural feature, the progenitor of the idea. Archaeologists and historians piecing together descriptions from texts like the Shijing Zaji, miscellaneous records of the Western capital, have found evidence of what we might call cooling halls or air-washed rooms. The principle was a masterpiece of passive engineering pushed to an active extreme. Picture a large pavilion or a specially designed room. Its entire structure was part of the machine. The first component was a water source, not just a decorative pool, but a constant, controlled flow. An aqueduct or a raised channel would bring water from a nearby river or spring to the very roof of the building. There, it would be released to cascade down over the tiled eaves or through specially constructed latticework screens made of woven bamboo or ceramic pipes. This cascading water served two purposes. First, it physically cooled the roof tiles, reducing the radiant heat baking down into the room below, like putting a cold compress on the forehead of the building. Second, and more importantly, it created a curtain of moisture and moving air. Now for the fan. At the room's entrance, or in a strategic courtyard upwind, stood large, manual rotary fans. These weren't the handheld variety. These were huge, paddle wheel-like constructions, often 7 or 10 feet in diameter, made of stretched fabric or feathers mounted on a central axle. Teams of servants, a designated cooling crew, would turn cranks to rotate these giant fans, drawing air through the shimmering, cooling waterfall at the building's perimeter and forcing this newly chilled, humidified breeze into the hall's interior. The effect, by all accounts, was remarkable. A Tang Dynasty poet later describing such a hall wrote of entering a misty grotto in midsummer, and of a chill that required light furs. It was a sensory illusion of season shifting, powered by hydraulics and human labor. This system, the water curtain plus the manually driven fan, was the direct conceptual ancestor of the mechanical air conditioner. It contained all the core principles: forced airflow, evaporative cooling, and the deliberate engineering of a microclimate. But it was still woefully inefficient in terms of energy input. It required a dedicated water source, significant infrastructure, and a small army of servants turning cranks in the heat they were trying to banish. It was the ultimate luxury, a thermodynamic declaration of power. We command not just people, but the very weather in this room. And here's one of those bizarre, little-known truths that historians love to debate. The water used in these systems wasn't always just plain river water. Some records suggest that for the imperial family, the water might be scented. They'd steep herbs like patchouli, chrysanthemum, or sweet wormwood in it, or even infuse it with prized lumps of fragrant aloes wood. So the cooled air that wafted into the hall wasn't just cool, it was perfumed. Imagine that the world's first air-conditioned air was also aromatherapy. They were literally engineering a sensory experience of cool, fragrant luxury, a far cry from the slightly chemical, dry breeze from a modern AC vent. Scholars still argue over how widespread this practice was and whether it was for pleasure, for purported health benefits according to herbal medicine, or just another layer of ostentatious display. Was it a primitive air freshener, or was it medicine? The line, as always, was beautifully blurred. This Han system, for all its grandeur, was a dead end in terms of mass application. It was too big, too expensive, too tied to imperial privilege and specific architecture. But the idea, use a machine to push air through or over something cool, was now out there, floating in the collective engineering mind of China. The next logical step was so obvious, it's a wonder it took a few more centuries. Take the servants out of the equation. Replace their straining arms and aching backs with a force that doesn't tire, doesn't complain, and works around the clock. Replace the man with a water wheel. And that's where our story finds its named inventor. Not in the ordered Han, but in the cosmopolitan, technologically exuberant Tang Dynasty. The Tang Dynasty arrives like a vibrant, cosmopolitan breath of fresh air after the formalism of the Han. This is 7th to 10th century China, a golden age where the Silk Road is pumping goods, ideas, and people into the capital of Chang'an, one of the largest and most dazzling cities in the world. It's an era of poetry, painting, and profound technological curiosity. The imperial workshops are even more sophisticated, buzzing with influences from Persia, India, and Central Asia. In this atmosphere of expansive creativity, the problem of palace heat gets a new, more elegant solution. The manually cranked fan and the water curtain are about to be married by a machine, and the man often credited with officiating the wedding is an engineer and inventor named Ding Huan. Now, Ding Huan isn't a household name. He's not a famous general or a revered poet. He's a technocrat, a jiangzi de jiang, a master craftsman or chief engineer for the court. His story is fragmentary, recorded in texts like the records of the Tang Dynasty and later collected works on marvelous machines. He's credited with inventing all sorts of ingenious devices, a strange south-pointing carriage, a mechanical compass chariot that used differential gearing, intricate puppets powered by hydraulics, and a legendary perfume burner that was a marvel of balanced gimbals, allowing it to roll around without spilling its ashes, a precursor to the gyroscope. The man had a mind that saw the world in levers, counterweights, and rotary motion. In one sweltering Chang'an summer, he turned that mind to the emperor's comfort. Ding Huan looked at the existing cooling hall setup and saw an inefficiency, the human power source. Water was already doing the cooling. Could it not also do the blowing? The answer was his most famous invention, the water-driven fan-cooled hall, or as we might bluntly call it, the water-powered air conditioner. The key was the integration of a horizontal water wheel. Here's where the engineering gets beautifully simple. He channeled a stream of palace water not just over the roof, but directly onto the paddles of a large water wheel installed in a dedicated mechanical room adjacent to the imperial living quarters or audience hall. As the flowing water struck the paddles, it turned the wheel. This is the conversion of hydraulic energy into rotary mechanical energy, basic, reliable, and continuous. But the wheel itself wasn't the fan. Ding Huan's genius was in the transmission. From the axle of the water wheel, he used a series of gears and connecting rods, technology well understood in Chinese clockwork and mill designs, to transfer that rotation to a different plane. The water wheel turned vertically, but through his gear system, he could drive a series of large, vertical fan blades that rotated on a horizontal axis, like a modern ceiling fan lying on its side. These large fan blades, often made of lightweight wood and stretched silk, were housed in a duct or facing a lattice wall. Behind that wall was a constant spray or cascade of water or a channel of flowing water over pebbles. As the water wheel turned, it drove the fans, which drew air through the moist, cool lattice and pushed it into the royal chamber. Imagine the sound. Not the electric hum you're used to, but the steady, rhythmic splashing and gurgling of water, the creak of seasoned wood, the soft whoosh of large silk panels cutting the air. It was a machine that announced its own operation with a soothing, aqueous soundtrack. For the first time in history, a room was being cooled by a fully mechanical, self-sustaining system. Human labor was reduced to maintenance, ensuring the water channel was clear, perhaps oiling a gear. The machine did the work day and night as long as the water flowed. A fascinating and less-known detail historians dig up involves the fans themselves. Some sources suggest that for the most luxurious versions, the fan blades weren't just functional. They were artistic canvases. The silk could be painted with serene landscapes of misty mountains and cool pine forests, or with elegant calligraphy of poems about autumn breezes. So as they spun, they wouldn't just push air, they'd create a blur of soothing imagery, a visual suggestion of coolness to accompany the physical sensation. It was a full sensory engineering feat. The debate among scholars is whether this was purely aesthetic or had a psychological cooling effect, an early application of environmental psychology. Could looking at a painted mountain stream actually make you feel cooler? Ding Huan and his patrons seem to think so, blending mechanics, art, and perceptual trickery into one glorious cooling machine. The first air conditioner was, in every sense, a work of art. So let's step into that Tang Dynasty mechanical room and really unpack Ding Huan's masterpiece. You're standing in a slightly damp, stone-lined chamber adjacent to the emperor's private library. The air here is cool and smells of wet wood and mineral-rich water. In front of you is the heart of the system, the horizontal water wheel. It's not the massive, vertical mill wheel you might picture from European history. This one is more compact. Its axle mounted horizontally on sturdy wooden bearings. A sluice gate from the palace's main water channel directs a steady, forceful stream onto the carefully angled wooden paddles. Clunk splash, clunk splash, clunk splash. It turns with a deliberate, mesmerizing rhythm, each rotation of victory over inertia, powered by the endless, patient flow of water. Follow the axle as it disappears into a wooden gearbox. This is where the mechanical magic happens. On the axle is a driver gear, a large wooden wheel with sturdy, square teeth carved into its rim. This gear meshes perfectly with a smaller driven gear mounted on a vertical shaft. This simple pairing accomplishes two crucial things. It changes the plane of rotation from horizontal to vertical, and it increases speed. For every single rotation of the slow, powerful water wheel, the vertical shaft might spin 3 or 4 times. This is basic gear multiplication, but in this context, it's transformative. It turns powerful but slow hydraulic torque into the faster rotational speed needed to move air effectively. Now, attached to the top of this spinning vertical shaft, inside the plenum chamber that leads to the royal room, is the fan assembly. Picture not a propeller, but something closer to a modern revolving door laid on its side, or the sails of a windmill. For 6 or even 8 long, flat blades radiate from the central shaft. They're framed in lightweight enamel wood and covered with taut, painted silk. As the shaft spins, these blades become a blur, a continuous wall of motion. They are enclosed in a wooden duct that funnels their effort. On one side of this duct is an intake, open to the outside or to a specially prepared cooling chamber. On the other side is the outlet, an ornate lattice opening that leads directly into the emperor's space. But the fan doesn't just move warm air. That would be pointless. Its genius is in what it moves the air through or over. In the most common configuration, the intake side of the duct faced a wall that was essentially a waterfall. Water from the same source, driving the wheel, was channeled to trickle down a screen of porous hemp or a lattice of bamboo rods, creating a continuous, shimmering curtain. The spinning fan blades created negative pressure, sucking outside air through this cool, wet curtain. As the air passed through, it was forced into intimate contact with the water. The physics, though they wouldn't have called it that, is evaporative cooling. The water molecules with the highest kinetic energy jump from the liquid into the air, becoming vapor. This process steals heat energy from the remaining water and from the air itself. The air emerges on the other side of the curtain cooler and more humid, and is then propelled by the fan into the room. The sensation for the emperor, reclining on his daybed, would have been profound. It wasn't the dry, refrigerated chill of a modern AC, but something more organic, like sitting in a moist, cool updraft at the base of a cliff beside a mountain stream. The air would have carried the faint, clean scent of wet stone and wood. It was a manufactured natural breeze, a season in a box. The machine didn't just lower the temperature. It created an entire microclimate. And it did so with a gentle, rhythmic white noise, the splash of the water wheel, the gurgle of the cascade, the soft whir-whump of the silk sails, that would have drowned out the distant noises of the palace, adding a layer of auditory privacy and tranquility. You could easily fall asleep to that sound. Now, for a truly odd and delightful historical footnote. Some later texts, not necessarily about Ding Huan's original, but about similar devices, mention an added feature. To enhance the cooling illusion, servants would sometimes place large blocks of ice, harvested in winter and stored in deep ice cellars, into the water channel just upstream of the cooling curtain. This would superchill the water, making the output air even colder. But ice was an incredibly rare and expensive commodity, even for an emperor. So, a more common trick was to throw handfuls of saltpeter, potassium nitrate, into the water tank. Dissolving saltpeter in water is an endothermic process. It absorbs heat from its surroundings, making the water noticeably colder. They discovered a primitive chemical refrigeration effect, likely by accident, while experimenting with alchemical compounds. Historians still argue whether this was a regular practice or just an occasional stunt for special banquets. Was it practical cooling or just imperial alchemical theater? Either way, it shows the lengths they go to push their marvelous machine to its limits, blending mechanics, chemistry, and a touch of magic to command the very air. With Ding Huan's successful prototype, the water-driven fan-cooled hall ceased to be just a clever machine and evolved into an art form. In the centuries that followed, particularly during the Song Dynasty, a period of incredible technological sophistication and refined aesthetics, the device was not merely copied. It was elevated, becoming a symbol of cultured luxury and intellectual prowess. It moved from being an imperial secret to a coveted marvel for the highest echelons of the scholar-official class and regional nobility. And as it spread, it became more ornate, more integrated into the very philosophy of harmonious living. Imagine you're a wealthy Song Dynasty magistrate or a successful merchant who has earned the favor of the court. You've built a lavish country villa outside the bustling capital, a retreat for contemplation and entertaining. Of course, you install a cooling hall, but it's no longer just a mechanical room and a fan. The entire structure is designed around the experience. The water source might be a serene, artificial stream diverted from a nearby river, flowing through your rock garden before it reaches the machine. The sound of the water is as important as its cooling effect. The architects would design the channel to create specific auditory textures. A gentle trickle over arranged stones here, a soft splash into a catch basin there, turning the machine's operation into a natural soundscape. The fan assembly itself becomes a centerpiece. The blades could be crafted from sandalwood or other fragrant woods, so the friction of their rotation releases a subtle perfume into the air. The silk stretched across them might be painted by a noted artist with scenes from famous poems about autumn or winter, or with delicate depictions of cranes flying over icy lakes. When the fan spins, these images blur into a soothing, hypnotic palette of cool colors and suggestive imagery. The outlet lattice, through which the cooled air flows, is no mere wooden grid. It's an intricately carved screen perhaps depicting a grove of bamboo, itself a symbol of resilience and cool shade, or a complex geometric pattern that diffuses the breeze into a gentle, widespread flow. The machine is hidden, but its outputs, the air, the sound, the faint scent, are curated artistic experiences. This integration reflects a core principle of Chinese elite aesthetics, the seamless blend of human artifice and natural essence. The cooling machine was the ultimate expression of this. It didn't fight nature brutally. It harnessed a natural force, flowing water, to mimic a natural phenomenon, a cool breeze, and then framed that phenomenon within a context of artistic beauty. It was technology in service of elegance, refinement. To own and operate such a device signaled that you weren't just rich. You were a person of profound taste and understanding, a patron of both engineering and the arts. You could discuss the hydraulic efficiency with an engineer in the afternoon and compose a poem about the manufactured zephyr in the evening. Here's a wonderfully obscure and specific detail that survives in some household records: the seasonal adjustment of the fan blades. It seems that some particularly fastidious owners would change the fabric on the fan blades with the seasons, even though the machine was only used in summer. In the height of summer, they might use plain, undyed hemp or silk for maximum airflow. But for the early and late summer months, or for different social occasions, they might switch to heavier, patterned silks that created a slightly different sound and feel to the breeze, a deeper whoosh versus a lighter whir. Some even suggest that for nighttime use, they might use a darker fabric, as if the breeze itself should be dressed for the occasion. Historians and textile specialists have long debated how much of this was practical. Different materials might affect humidity or speed, and how much was pure, ritualistic connoisseurship. Were they tuning their air like we might tune an audio system? The evidence is scant but tantalizing, pointing to a culture that didn't just use technology but curated it. This period represents the peak of the pre-modern air conditioner's cultural life. It was a bespoke, luxury appliance, each one unique to its setting and owner. But it was also, in a way, a technological dead end. Its beauty and complexity were its limitations. It required constant maintenance, would swell silk sags, gears wear. It needed a dedicated water source and skilled artisans to keep it running. It was fundamentally tied to a specific location and a vast infrastructure privilege. It could never become democratized. Yet the core idea, the beautiful, almost philosophical idea of creating a perfect, personalized climate, had been firmly planted. And like a seed on the wind, this idea wouldn't stay confined to the gardens of China. It began to drift, carried along the very trade routes that brought silks and spices to the world. The concept of mechanical cooling was about to go on a journey. The journey of the water-driven fan out of China is a story of whispers and fragments, not of blueprints and mass migration. It traveled not as a complete, packaged technology, but as a traveler's tale, a marvel described in the court of a foreign ruler, a sketch in a merchant's diary. The primary vector was the Silk Road, that sprawling network of overland and maritime routes connecting Chang'an and Guangzhou to Samarkand, Baghdad, and eventually the shores of the Mediterranean. Along with bolts of silk, sacks of pepper, and delicate porcelain, caravans and ships carried ideas. And one of the most tantalizing ideas was that of a machine that could summon coolness from water and motion. Picture a Persian ambassador or an Nestorian Christian merchant who has been granted an audience in a Tang or Song palace during a scorching summer month. He experiences the wonder of the cooling hall. He feels the manufactured breeze, sees the misting water curtain, and perhaps, if he's lucky and curious, is given a glimpse of the mechanical room with its turning water wheel and spinning fans. He returns to his own land, to the court of the Caliph in Baghdad or the Shah in Isfahan. At a banquet, sweating in the arid heat, he describes what he saw. He gestures with his hands, mimicking the wheel and the fan. And the emperor sat there, in midsummer, as if in a spring grove, he might say. The listeners are fascinated. They have their own ancient traditions of cooling, wind catchers, badgers, underground aqueducts, cannons, and massive hand-pulled fans. But a self-powered fan? A machine that does the work itself? That is new. This is likely how the knowledge spread, through oral description and the efforts of local engineers to replicate the effect based on second-hand accounts. We see echoes, not copies. In the Islamic Golden Age, particularly under the Abbasid Caliphate in Baghdad, there was a flourishing of engineering texts and a passion for ingenious devices called IRIB wonders. While no direct Arabic or Persian record credits a Chinese water fan, descriptions of sophisticated water-raising devices, clocks, and automated entertainments are plentiful. It's highly plausible that the concept of a water wheel driving a fan for cooling was attempted in some form. A Persian engineer, hearing the description, might logically connect a noria, a water-lifting wheel, to a series of paddles to stir the air in a courtyard, perhaps directing it over a cannon to cool it. The transmission likely also went east and south. Korean records from the Goryeo Dynasty show evidence of elaborate water clocks and automated displays that used similar hydraulic and gear technology. It's conceivable the cooling fan concept filtered into royal Korean palaces. In Japan, during the Heian period, the elite were obsessed with refined ways to combat summer's mushiatsui, humid heat. They used waterfalls and streams in garden design for their cooling sound and mist. While there's no definitive proof of a mechanical system, the philosophical approach, creating a microclimate through controlled water and airflow, aligns perfectly with the Heian aesthetic of mono-no-aware, the poignant appreciation of transient beauty, like a cool breeze on a hot day. But here's a fascinating and less-known twist that scholars love to debate: the possibility of a parallel, independent invention. There are tantalizing, vague references in some medieval Sanskrit texts from the Indian subcontinent to a jali yantra, water machine, used in royal palaces to produce cool air. The descriptions are maddeningly brief, often poetic rather than technical. Did the idea travel from China to India? Or did Indian engineers, masters of hydraulic engineering and temple architecture, arrive at a similar solution independently, driven by the same desperate need to cool marble palaces under the blistering subcontinental sun? The historical record is too sparse to say for sure. It's one of those quiet mysteries of technological history. Did it spread, or did it spring up in multiple places? The consensus leans toward diffusion from China, but the possibility of parallel thought is a reminder that necessity isn't just the mother of invention. It's a mother who might give birth to similar-looking children in different parts of the world. This phase of the story is characterized by diffusion and mutation, not by revolutionary improvement. The Chinese system remained the most sophisticated and well-documented. Elsewhere, the idea was adapted to local materials and needs, often losing the elegant, integrated gear system and reverting to simpler setups. The core, beautiful idea persisted: use flowing water to create a cool breeze. But it remained locked in the realm of extreme luxury and royal privilege, a wonder for the few. Its greatest limitation was now becoming apparent, a limitation not of imagination, but of physics and economics. It was about to hit a wall that would consign it to being a historical curiosity for centuries. The water-driven fan-cooled hall was a masterpiece of its time, a symphony of wood, water, and silk. But as we pull back from a marvel of its operation and look at it with the cold eye of an engineer or an economist, its fatal flaws come into sharp focus. These weren't small bugs to be fixed. They were fundamental limitations baked into the pre-industrial world. This is why the machine, for all its brilliance, never became the ancient equivalent of a household appliance. It was a magnificent dead end. The first and most obvious constraint was its energy source. It required a constant, significant flow of water with enough hydraulic head, enough drop in elevation to turn the wheel with force. This wasn't just about having a stream nearby. It needed to be dammed, channeled, and sluiced with precision. This tied the machine irrevocably to a specific location with the right hydrology. You couldn't put it just anywhere. It meant the cooling was available only in that one building, that one room. There was no portability, no flexibility. And if the stream dried up in a summer drought, a common occurrence just when you needed the machine most, the entire system fell silent, becoming a complex and embarrassing sculpture. Then there was the issue of scale and labor. While the machine replaced the servants who turned the cranks on the old manual fans, it introduced a new, specialized labor force, the maintainers. This was not a set-it-and-forget-it device. The wooden gears, constantly wet, were prone to swelling, warping, and rot. The leather or hem drive belts would stretch and snap. The silk fan blades sagged when humid and tore. The water channels silted up with debris. Keeping the machine running required a team of skilled carpenters, water engineers, and textile workers on permanent call. It was less like maintaining an appliance and more like keeping a small, temperamental mill operational. The economic cost was staggering. For an emperor, it was a justifiable expense for his comfort. For even a very wealthy noble, it could become a ruinous hobby. The machine didn't free people from labor. It simply exchanged one kind of labor, fan cranking, for another, more technically demanding kind, machine tending. But perhaps the most profound limitation was its thermodynamic inefficiency. The machine relied entirely on evaporative cooling. This process has a ceiling, a point of diminishing returns dictated by the wet bulb temperature. In a hot, dry climate, it works wonderfully. Air passing over water can be cooled significantly. But in the hot, humid summers of much of eastern and southern China, where the air is already saturated with moisture, evaporative cooling becomes much less effective. The air can't hold much more water vapor, so little evaporation occurs, and little heat is removed. The machine would still move air, but the air it moved would be a damp, tepid breeze, doing little more than stirring the muggy heat. It was, in essence, a glorified, complicated fan on a very humid day. The fundamental science needed to break through this barrier. The vapor compression refrigeration cycle was over a millennium away. They had hit the ceiling of their understanding of physics. Here's a quirky historical footnote that underscores its impracticality: the problem of secondary cooling, or rather, the lack thereof. Modern AC cools an entire space uniformly, but the ancient machine produced a directed stream of cool air. If you were sitting directly in its path, you were in heaven. A few feet to the left or right, you were still in the sweaty, pre-industrial summer. Accounts suggest that at banquets, the place of honor was always the seat directly in line with the main air outlet. This could cause diplomatic incidents or courtly intrigue over seating arrangements. Who gets the cool spot? Historians have found records of minor officials complaining in letters about being seated outside the breeze at important functions, seeing it as a deliberate slight. The machine, meant to project harmony and control, could ironically become a source of social friction and perceived disrespect. It created a new kind of haves and have-nots within a single room. And so, as dynasties rose and fell, as palaces were sacked and rebuilt, the beautiful, finicky water-driven fan began to disappear. It was a technology too fragile, too expensive, and too context-dependent to survive times of turmoil. When the Mongol invasions of the 13th century swept through, or during the bloody transitions between dynasties, the specialized knowledge to maintain these devices was often lost. The artisans were dispersed or killed, the delicate parts were broken for firewood, and the water channels fell into disrepair. The machine faded from physical reality into the realm of legend and textual memory, a curious footnote in encyclopedias compiled by scholars of later eras, who had read about Ding Huan's cold air-producing wheel with a mix of awe and skepticism. Could such a thing have ever truly existed? It seemed as fantastical as a dragon. The great dream of manufactured coolness didn't die, but it fell into a deep, centuries-long sleep, waiting for a new world with new energy and new scientific principles to wake it. So the great machine faded. The last of the Tang and Song cooling halls fell silent, their water channels clogged with leaves and silt, their beautiful painted fan blades eaten by insects or repurposed for other uses. The knowledge of their construction and precise gearing didn't vanish in a day, but it bled away over generations. It became the domain of antiquarians and encyclopedia compilers, a wonder of the former age, to be marveled at in text, but never actually seen. For the better part of a millennium, the active, mechanical pursuit of cool air was largely abandoned. The dream of controlling one's personal climate retreated back to the older, passive strategies: architecture, shade, hand fans, and the simple, profound wisdom of slowing down. Imagine the world in, say, the 15th century. In Florence, the Renaissance is blooming, but the summers in the Tuscan hills are still sweltering. In the Forbidden City in Beijing, new Ming Dynasty emperors build grand halls, but they cool them with high ceilings, deep eaves, and blocks of ice brought from distant mountains, not with forgotten hydraulic machines. In the palaces of the Ottoman sultans in Istanbul, the most advanced cooling technology is still the clever use of wind towers and fountains. The water-driven fan is a ghost, a half-remembered story from a time considered both brilliantly sophisticated and vaguely mythical. The machine was a whisper in the historical record, kept alive in dusty scrolls like the Songshi, History of Song, or in miscellaneous jottings like the Mengshi Bitten Dream Pool Essays, where it was described with a sense of nostalgic wonder, as if talking about a unicorn. This period of forgetting is crucial. It's the long, silent valley between two peaks of innovation. The technology wasn't just dormant, it was culturally buried. The focus of engineering had shifted. In Europe, the energies were going into navigation, artillery, and printing presses. In China, after the Mongol Yuan dynasty and the rise of the inward-looking Ming, there was a turn towards consolidating existing knowledge rather than pioneering new mechanical marvels of personal luxury. The societal and economic conditions that fostered Ding Huan's invention, a certain type of courtly extravagance coupled with systematic, state-sponsored engineering, had changed. The machine didn't fit the new world. It was a relic. But here's the interesting, less-known part of this dark age of cooling. The idea persisted in the most unexpected of places, in fiction and imagination. As these technical descriptions were copied and recopied by scholars, they sometimes bled into more popular or literary works. Tales of fantastical palaces in far-off lands, or in mythical times, would include mentions of self-waving fans or halls of eternal spring. The machine became mythologized. In some Ming Dynasty vernacular stories or Chuanji dramas, a wealthy villain might boast of a cooling machine from the ancients to show his decadence. It became a plot device, a symbol of impossible luxury and almost magical engineering. In a way, this kept the concept alive in the cultural bloodstream, not as a practical blueprint, but as a symbol of what could be. Historians of literature and technology love to trace these echoes, debating how much these fictional accounts were based on garbled memories of real devices and how much they were pure invention. It's a reminder that when technology fails, storytelling sometimes takes up the torch. Meanwhile, the physical principles the machine relied on didn't disappear. They just weren't applied to human comfort. Evaporative cooling was still understood in a basic sense. People still hung wet mats in doorways. Water wheels and gearing systems became more common than ever in mills and forges, but they were grinding grain, pounding paper pulp, or operating bellows for smelters. The energy was being used for industry, not for comfort. The very success of industrial milling technology in some ways underscored why the cooling machine failed. It was a non-essential application of a powerful but location-bound energy source. In a world of scarcity, you used your water wheel for bread and iron first, for cool breezes of very distant last. And so, for centuries, the summer reigned unchallenged by machinery. The wealthy might have their ice houses and their shaded gardens. The poor had their siestas and their hopes for a breeze. The revolutionary idea of a machine for comfort slept, waiting for its second act. That awakening wouldn't come from a rediscovery of Ding Huan scrolls. It would come from an entirely new direction, fueled by a new kind of power that wasn't bound to a riverbank, and a new understanding of the hidden properties of gases and liquids. The long sleep was about to be broken not by a dream of the past, but by the steam-driven, electrically charged nightmares and dreams of a world undergoing an industrial revolution. The ghost of the water-driven fan was waiting in the wings, but the stage was about to be completely rebuilt. The reawakening begins not in a palace, but in a library. It's the 17th or 18th century in Europe, the age of the Enlightenment and the scientific revolution. Scholars are obsessed with recovering the knowledge of the ancients, but also with surpassing it. In this atmosphere of global curiosity, Jesuit missionaries and adventurous merchants are sending back reports, translations, and sometimes entire crates of books from China to Europe. Among dense philosophical treatises and manuals of statecraft, descriptions of ancient marvels occasionally surface. A French philosophe or a British member of the Royal Society, sipping hot chocolate in a London coffee house, might read a translated excerpt about automatic cold air fans from the Tang Dynasty. Their reaction would likely be a mix of skepticism and intense fascination. Could the Chinese have truly achieved this? The description was often vague, lacking the detailed mechanical diagrams that European engineers craved. But the seed of the idea was planted. Mechanical cooling was possible. This period saw the first European attempts to reinvent the concept, but now through the lens of burgeoning modern science. In the late 17th century, inventors weren't trying to replicate Ding Huan's water wheel. They were experimenting with the fundamental physics of evaporation and condensation. They knew, from the work of Robert Boyle and others, that air had properties, that it could expand and contract, and that rapid evaporation caused cooling. The goal shifted from creating a breeze to actually lowering temperature through chemical or physical means. An Englishman named Sir William Congreve even designed a drip cooler in the early 1800s, where air was passed over dripping water and through cheesecloth, a direct, if unintentional, echo of the ancient Chinese water curtain, but now conceived as a scientific experiment rather than an imperial luxury. The real catalyst, however, was the Industrial Revolution's gift and curse: steam. First, steam power solved the ancient machine's primary limitation: location. A steam engine could be placed anywhere you could bring coal and water. It could drive a fan or a pump independently of a river. The energy was portable and prodigious. But steam also created a new, desperate need for cooling. Factories were infernos. Iron foundries, textile mills with their humid, steaming vats, printing presses in cramped urban buildings. These places became unbearably, dangerously hot. The problem was no longer about royal comfort. It was about industrial efficiency, worker productivity, and even preventing the spoilage of goods. The quest for cooling was reborn not from luxury, but from necessity and capital. And here lies a deliciously ironic and little-known historical twist. Some of the earliest practical experiments with air conditioning in the 19th century were aimed not at people, but at paper and textiles. In textile mills, the humidity had to be precisely controlled to prevent threads from becoming brittle and snapping. In printing houses, paper would expand and contract with changes in heat and humidity, ruining the alignment of multicolor prints. Inventors like William Cullen in Scotland and later, more successfully, Dr. John Gorey in Florida, USA, were tinkering with mechanical refrigeration to solve these industrial problems, and in Gorey's case, to cool hospital rooms for malaria patients. Gorey even patented a machine in 1851 that used a compressor to make ice, which could then cool air. His machine was a commercial failure, but it was a direct ancestor of modern refrigeration. Historians still debate the exact lineage of ideas, but it's clear that the path to modern AC was paved by industrial needs first, human comfort a distant second. The ghost of the Tang Emperor's comfort had been resurrected as a servant to the steam-powered loom and the printing press. This era of rediscovery and reinvention was chaotic, competitive, and global. It was no longer one civilization's secret. It was a race powered by coal, capitalism, and calculus. The ancient Chinese principle of evaporative cooling was finally being understood in the precise language of thermodynamics. Concepts like latent heat of vaporization. Engineers could now calculate how much cooling they could theoretically get from a given amount of water evaporation. The beautiful, artistic machine of the past was being stripped down to its functional bones, analyzed, and rebuilt with pistons, pressure gauges, and condensers. The world was warming up from industry, and in that paradoxical heat, the modern science of cooling was being forged. The stage was almost set for the final act. All it needed was a systematic mind to put all the new pieces, compression, condensation, evaporation, and electric fans, together into a reliable, marketable package. That mind would belong not to a court engineer, but to a young, bespectacled graduate from Cornell University in the United States, facing a very specific problem for a printing company in Brooklyn. The baton was about to be passed across 12 centuries from Ding Huan to Willis Carrier. The bridge between the ancient world of evaporative cooling and the modern era of precise climate control is a man named Willis Haviland Carrier. His story begins not in a sweltering palace, but in a humid, problematic printing plant in Brooklyn, New York, in the year 1902. The Sackett-Wilhelms Lithographing and Publishing Company was having a miserable time. Their high-quality color printing was being ruined by the summer humidity. The paper would absorb moisture from the muggy air, expanding just enough to throw the meticulous alignment of successive color layers out of whack. The result was blurry, misregistered images, and huge financial losses. They needed consistency. They needed to control not just temperature, but the very moisture content of the air itself. This was the specific industrial problem that sparked the invention of the modern air conditioner. Willis Carrier, a 25-year-old engineer working for the Buffalo Forge Company, was assigned to crack it. He didn't set out to cool people. He set out to condition air as an industrial ingredient. Standing on a foggy railroad platform in Pittsburgh, he had his flash of insight, watching the mist and understanding the relationship between temperature, humidity, and dew point. His genius was in systematizing the principles that had been haphazardly used for millennia. He didn't just blow air over cold water. He created a machine that could control the dew point of air with precision. His first apparatus, patented in 1906, used chilled coils. Air was forced over these coils, cooling it below its dew point, which caused water vapor to condense out, literally wringing the humidity from the air like water from a sponge. The now cooler, drier air could then be reheated to exactly the desired temperature and humidity. This was the birth of conditioned air with controlled temperature and humidity. The early Carrier machines were monstrous, room-sized behemoths. They were powered by steam engines or early electric motors, driving large centrifugal compressors that circulated a refrigerant. Early ones used toxic or flammable substances like ammonia, methyl chloride, or propane. They were expensive, complex, and dangerous. They were not for homes. They were for factories, textile mills, and later, tobacco warehouses and pharmaceutical labs. Human comfort was a fortunate side effect. The first spaces cooled for people were theaters and department stores, who realized that manufactured weather was a spectacular marketing gimmick. In the summer of 1925, Carrier installed a revolutionary system in the Rivoli Theater in New York City. The public flocked not just to the movies, but to the sensation of sitting in a cool, dry auditorium while the city baked outside. Summer movie blockbusters, as a cultural phenomenon, owe their existence to this moment. Comfort cooling had found its mass-market Trojan horse, entertainment. Now, for an odd and wonderful footnote in this modern chapter. One of the biggest early drivers for precision air conditioning wasn't human comfort or even manufacturing, but the burgeoning computer industry. Not the digital computers of later decades, but the earlier human computers. The large teams of people, often women, who performed complex mathematical calculations by hand in rooms filled with desk calculators. In the 1930s, these computer pools in places like the Massachusetts Institute of Technology or insurance companies were plagued by the same problem as the Sackett-Wilhelm's printing plant: humidity. It warped their paper calculation sheets and made the ink run. More critically, the workers themselves were less productive in stifling heat. Installing air conditioning in these rooms boosted accuracy and output dramatically. Later, with the advent of early electronic computers like the NIAC, the need became even more acute. The vacuum tubes generated immense heat and were sensitive to humidity. So the evolution of the modern digital world is directly linked to the development of air conditioning. Historians and sociologists love to debate this causal link. Did air conditioning enable the information age, or was it the other way around? It's a classic chicken and egg scenario of technological symbiosis. Carrier's invention was the final, crucial synthesis. It married the ancient understanding of evaporative/condensative principles with modern compressors, safe refrigerants, like Freon, introduced in the 1920s, and electric fans. It was reliable, scalable, and most importantly, it could work anywhere there was an electrical outlet. It had severed the last tie to a specific water source. The river was now a metaphorical stream of electrons flowing through a wire. The dream that began with servants pulling ropes and water wheels turning in a Tang Dynasty palace had, through a long and winding journey, finally materialized into a humming metal box that could fit on a rooftop or outside a window, bringing controlled weather to anyone who could afford it. The age of personal climate had truly begun, but it was still a commercial and industrial tool. The final push into the home, into your bedroom, would require one more thing. Not a new invention, but a new mindset and a post-war economic boom. The journey from Carrier's industrial machines to the gentle hum in your bedroom was a slow cultural conquest. For decades after its invention, air conditioning remained largely commercial. It cooled movie theaters, department stores, office buildings, and factories, places of work, commerce, and public gathering. The home was the final frontier, and it was a tough sell. The first residential units in the 1920s and 30s were monstrously expensive, cumbersome affairs, often requiring major structural modifications. They were marketed as a medical device for the infirm or as an ultimate luxury for the ultra-rich, a novelty akin to a private airplane. The Great Depression and World War II then put all such domestic dreams on hold. The technology hibernated, perfected in factories that were humming for the war effort. The transformation happened in the post-war boom of the 1950s and 60s in America. This is when air conditioning became a cultural and architectural revolution, not just a technological one. A confluence of factors made it happen. Rising middle-class wealth, suburban expansion, the baby boom, and a powerful marketing machine that sold not just comfort, but an entirely new way of life. The invention of the smaller, more affordable window unit in the early 1950s was the hardware, but the software was the dream. Magazines and advertisements showed glamorous, modern families in sleek living rooms, cool and unbothered by the summer chaos outside. It promised a cleaner, quieter home. Windows could stay shut against dust and noise, better sleep, and freedom from the enervating grip of heat. It was sold as an essential component of the modern, efficient, sanitary American home. This had profound and unintended consequences. It changed architecture fundamentally. The traditional features designed to combat heat, deep porches, high ceilings, cross-ventilation, sleeping porches, shaded windows, suddenly became obsolete. Houses could be built cheaper, boxier, and with more glass, because a machine would handle the climate. The iconic American ranch-style home, sprawling and sealed, is a product of air conditioning. It changed demographics. The American South and Southwest, once considered grueling in summer, became massively more livable and attractive for year-round residents and business, fueling the Sun Belt boom. It even changed politics. The migration to air-conditioned Sun Belt states altered the American political landscape. On a mundane level, it changed diets. Summer foods like heavy stews gave way to year-round salads and frozen foods. And clothing. The summer suit survived, and indoor layers became necessary. And here's a quirky, less discussed sociological side effect: the debate over air conditioning etiquette and the Great Thermostat War. Almost as soon as AC entered offices and homes, conflict followed. What was the right temperature? The modern office became a battleground of cardigans versus short sleeves, with endless passive-aggressive notes left on the control unit. Studies would later show that most systems were calibrated decades ago for the metabolic comfort of a 40-year-old, 150-pound man in a full business suit, a standard that leaves many women, who on average have a slower metabolic rate, perpetually chilly. Historians and social scientists find this a rich area of study, how a technology designed to eliminate discomfort created entirely new social frictions and power dynamics. Who controls the thermostat? It's a question of domestic and office politics that Ding Huan never had to consider. The emperor's breeze was for the emperor alone. Our democratized cool air has to be negotiated. By the 1970s and 80s, central air conditioning became a standard feature in new American homes, and the window unit became a ubiquitous feature of city soundscapes. The technology had completed its journey from imperial wonder to industrial tool to consumer commodity. It was no longer a marvel. It was an expectation, an invisible utility like running water. The profound human struggle against summer heat, a story as old as civilization, had apparently been won in the developed world by a whirring compressor in a metal box. But in this victory lay a new set of global challenges: immense energy consumption, environmental concerns about refrigerants, and the heat island effect of cities packed with AC units dumping their waste heat outside. The solution had spawned new problems. Yet, as you lie in your climate-controlled room, the direct line from that Han Dynasty water wheel to your vent is clear. The dream was consistent. Only the mechanics changed. The final step in our story isn't about the future, but about closing the circle, connecting that ancient word to the modern hum, and finally letting the gentle sound of that history lull you to sleep. So here we are, you and I, separated by centuries but connected by a continuous thread of human ingenuity, a thread spun from water, silk, wood, steam, electricity, and finally, the quiet hum in your room tonight. It's a profound circle. Ding Huan's water wheel, turning in a mist-filled chamber, and the compressor in your outdoor unit, cycling refrigerant through a coiled labyrinth, are both answering the same primal call. They are manifestations of the same desire, to carve out a pocket of personal climate from the indifferent vastness of weather. The principle at the very core, the phase change of a liquid absorbing heat to become a gas, is the common heartbeat. The ancient Chinese harnessed it through the slow, majestic evaporation of water cascading over a lattice. Willis Carrier harnessed it through the violent, rapid compression and expansion of chemical refrigerants. Different tools, same fundamental physics. One is a gentle whisper from nature, coaxed and amplified. The other is a command shouted in the language of thermodynamics. But the goal, comfort, remains beautifully, humanly identical. Think about the sensory journey. The Tang Emperor experienced cooling as a full-body aesthetic event. The sight of painted blurring landscapes on spinning silk, the sound of splashing water and creaking wood, the smell of wet stone and fragrant aloes wood, the feel of a moist, gentle breeze on his skin. Your experience is stripped down, minimalist, and incredibly efficient. A dry, uniform temperature, perhaps the faintest whisper of air from a vent, a low, consistent electronic hum. We've traded multisensory artistry for silent, invisible efficacy. We gained incredible control and democratization, but perhaps we lost a certain poetry in the process. No one writes odes to their HVAC ductwork. But then again, no one in the Tang Dynasty could sleep in perfect, consistent comfort in a top-floor apartment in Phoenix, Arizona. It's a trade-off between the bespoke and the universal. This brings us to one of the great, quiet debates that historians and philosophers of technology mull over. Is air conditioning the ultimate triumph of human separation from nature, or is it the ultimate refinement of living with it? The ancient system worked with hydrological cycles. It was an extension of the river. Our modern systems often work against the environmental gradient, using vast amounts of energy to pump heat from where we don't want it to somewhere else, usually the outside air, making cities hotter. One was an integrated part of a local ecosystem. The other is often a defiant bubble against a global one. Yet, both are fundamentally human. We are the species that doesn't just adapt to our environment. We reshape the tiny parts of it we inhabit to suit ourselves. From the first fire in a cave to the smart thermostat learning your schedule, it's a continuum. The air conditioner is just one of our most pervasive and powerful reshaping tools. And as we near the end of this long story, let's revisit that little-known fact about the chemical cooling trick, throwing saltpeter into the water. It was a stumble toward a deeper truth. They were accidentally discovering endothermic reactions, just as later chemists would intentionally develop refrigerants. It was a hint of a path not taken, a chemical road to cooling that was beyond their means to fully develop. Today, scientists are looking back at some of these older, simpler principles for sustainable solutions. Modern evaporative coolers, incredibly efficient in dry climates, are direct descendants of the water curtain. Researchers are even revisiting certain salt solutions for advanced, energy-efficient cooling systems. The wheel turns. Sometimes progress looks less like a straight line and more like a spiral, revisiting old ideas with new knowledge and materials. So as you listen, perhaps you can hear the echoes in the hum. The splash of the paddle is now the gurgle of refrigerant in the lines. The creak of the wooden gear is now the soft click of the compressor cycling off. The whoosh of the silk fan is the breeze from your vent. The journey from then to now wasn't a loss of wonder, but a transformation of its form. The wonder is no longer in the visible, ornate machine. It's in the mundane miracle of predictability, the sheer, quiet normalcy of a cool room on a hot night. This invisible, reliable comfort is the final, democratized masterpiece. The Emperor's singular, artistic marvel has become your nightly, unremarkable grace. And with that thought, we can begin to let the story itself become like that cool breeze, something that washes over you, settles around you, and finally, gently, releases you from its flow. The last section isn't about more history. It's about letting all of it fade into the comfort of the present and into sleep. And so the long, winding river of this story finally reaches its quiet estuary, here in the calm of your own room. The frantic ingenuity, the royal decrees, the clatter of wooden gears, the roar of steam engines, and the hum of compressors, all of it dissolves now into this single, peaceful point. You, resting in a space made comfortable by 1,000 years of accumulated dreams. The struggle is over, for tonight at least. The heat, that ancient and formidable tyrant, has been politely, efficiently shown the door. Not by armies, but by an idea that refused to die, an idea that slept in scrolls, mutated in tales, and finally woke to the sound of electricity. It's a profound thing when you stop to feel it. You are living in the fulfilled fantasy of every sweating emperor, every gasping scholar, every servant who ever pulled a rope in the hopes of creating a moment's relief. Their collective one has been answered in the most ordinary way imaginable, by a thermostat set to a number you like. Let the weight of that history soften now. Let the images we've wandered through, the jade pillows, the painted silk fans, the great water wheels turning in misty halls, the sprawling blueprints of Willis Carrier. Let them all grow blurry and gentle in your mind's eye. They're not demands on your attention anymore, but rather like figures in a tapestry receding into a soft background. The details are no longer important. What remains is the feeling they were all chasing. That feeling is here now, in the air around you. It's the feeling of physical ease, of the body unclenching from its age-old, seasonal vigilance against the elements. It is a deep, quiet luxury, so common now we forget to name it, the luxury of climatic choice. Listen to the sounds of your modern sanctuary. Maybe there's the steady, low-frequency drone of your central air, a sound so embedded in modern life it's almost a silence. Or perhaps it's the rhythmic whisper of a ceiling fan, a direct, elegant descendant of those silk-bladed rotors, now moving dry, cooled air in a continuous, lazy circle. Or maybe, for you, there's just the perfect stillness of a room already brought to the right temperature, a silent monument to the machine's earlier labors. Whatever the sound, hear it not as a machine, but as a lullaby composed by engineers, played by physics, and delivered to you by the collective effort of our species' stubborn refusal to be uncomfortably hot. Let that sound be the anchor that holds you to the present, safe and separate from the sweltering past. Your breathing is slowing now, syncing with a rhythm much older than any machine. In and out, the cool air enters, a gentle guest, and the warmer air leaves. It's your own personal, internal exchange, a miniature climate all your own. The room holds you in its constant, tempered embrace, asking nothing in return. There are no gears to maintain, no water channels to clear, no servants to relieve. There's only this profound, effortless gift of just rightness. Let your thoughts drift away from inventions and dynasties. Let them settle on nothing more than the sensation of the sheet against your skin, the perfect weight of the blanket, the cool spot on the pillow where your cheek rests. This is the destination the entire story was trying to reach. Not a museum of technology, but a moment of perfect human rest. The world outside your window continues on with its ancient cycles of heat and cool, day and night. But in here, you have spun a cocoon of eternal, gentle spring. It is a miracle so complete it has become invisible. So, as sleep begins to gather at the edges of your consciousness, don't think of history as a series of events. Think of it as a long, warm exhalation, and this moment, right here, as the deep, cool, welcoming inhale. Let the story go. Let the facts fade. All that's left is the comfort, deepening with every breath you take, pulling you down, gently and irresistibly, into the soft, welcoming dark of sleep. You are supported by centuries. You are cooled by a legacy of wonder. Now just let go. End of script. Sweet dreams.